If you're looking to buy land, this video is going to be very valuable to you. We're going to go through a comprehensive list of things to look for and look at when you buy land. Let's go ahead and start. To note, this is not in particular order, and also we're going to have a link to one of our blogs in the description below, and you're going to be able to go ahead and download the checklist for your use when you go buy land. What use are you going to use the property for? Is it going to be your homestead? Is it going to be a business? Is it going to be a hunting area or a hunting property? Or is it going to be, a recreational property? All that is something you need to determine before you go shopping for a property, because obviously the zoning, the restrictions, and all those items will go ahead and prevent you from doing some of that, doing what you're wanting to do on that property. Restrictions. Is there any type of restrictions on the property related to HOA restrictions or deed restrictions? You're gonna have to look at the deed and see if there's also a HOA on the property. This can prevent you from using that property in many different ways. Related to the access of property, meaning, accessing it via vehicle or walking or whatever. Does it have a good road system, number one, but does it have road frontage or highway frontage on the property, or does it have easements? And easements are very important to review with the attorney or the title company that you're using. If there's no easement and there's just a gentleman's handshake related to entry of that property, you're gonna have to watch out for that. Make sure that those easements are in place, or you have a good way to get to it from the highway, directly from the highway, because if you don't, you're gonna have a landlocked property. Is the property in city limits or ETJ? Obviously, if you're in the city limits or ETJ, zoning laws are going to affect your property. For example, you might not be able to hunt on your property or do something certain that you want to do on that property. Once you get out of the ETJ and zoning, then you're within the county side. You're going to have a lot more freedom to use your property in typical circumstances. Mineral rights and water rights. Well, this is a hot topic, and for oil and gas, I've seen a lot of properties that don't have mineral rights. But is that a situation where it's going to be a no for that property? Well, it depends. If you're in the middle of a oil and gas field or a area that is very active, then that's going to be a very important thing. But if you're over in a area that has no oil and gas activity whatsoever, then that's not going to be as important. Water rights is another big one. Are you getting those water rights transferred over to your name when you buy a property? Now, I'm talking about the commercial water rights. That's going to be a bigger play down the road related to water rights. In some areas, it already is, especially in the West. Related to minerals and all that, if the seller says that they own the minerals, make sure you verify those minerals with a landman to see what you're actually getting, because a seller might say they have it, but in some cases they don't. And the title company is not going to verify that for you. Review the improvements on the property. That can be from fencing to road systems to the structures on the property, septic tanks, wells, water wells, tanks, water tanks. It can be all sorts of different things. But whatever is the major value on that property related to the structures and the water well system and all that, make sure you get it inspected. Because those things are very high in price to replace. Obviously, water is a huge thing. And if you have a water well, it doesn't necessarily mean it's producing what it's supposed to related to gallons per minute on water. The more thorough inspection you do on a property, the better you're going to be off when you make that deal. And make sure you do a right deal. This might sound crazy, but what about utilities? Do you have access to electricity? Do you have access to sewage and water? Well, not all properties have access to electricity, even nowadays. Make sure you have access to electricity. And if there's no drop, at least I tell people all the time, that's going to cost you $3,000 to get a drop. A septic system might cost you $15,000. A water well, depending on where you are in the country, can be ranging from $15,000 to $40,000. And there's no guarantee that you're going to hit water also. So make sure when you look at your utilities, that you're figuring out if you have the easements to be in place to put electricity on your property, and you have access to some of these utilities. When you have a raw property, you need to make sure you're looking at the neighbors to see what they're doing with their properties related to those utilities. That can cost you a ton of money if you don't do it correctly, and it's going to cost you a lot of money to put the utilities in. Another big thing is, are you actually going to get water? There are places in the United States that if you drill a well, it doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get water. So one thing to do is make sure that you call a local water well driller company and talk to them about the region that you're buying the property, and heck, have them come out before you buy a property to make sure that you're going to get or have a good chance of getting water if you drill a water well for your property. Make sure it has a survey. Make sure it's updated with what all the improvements are on that property, such as homes or easements on the property. See what date that survey was done. If it was done most recently, more than likely it's accurate, but there's no guarantee. Walk the property to see the property lines are actually correct based off that survey. And if it's not, or if you don't feel comfortable with it, order a new survey. It's going to show you the easements on the property, all the improvements, typically the road systems, and anything that shows as an encroachment. Encroachment basically means a neighbor or someone is building on your property. The one that people don't mention is topography on the property. Well, that goes back to the use of your property. If you're looking to build all sorts of stuff on your property and you have a topography on your property that's prominent basically means is that you have a large elevation change, steep property, you're not going to be able to build on that property. Or if you have a lot of floodplain. So it's very important before you even step on a property that you look at the topography to see what you're getting into on that property. And there's all sorts of tools to use for topography and floodplains, and so you can study that property to see if it's going to be the right fit for you. Your neighbor is going to be very important. You're going to have to live with them, and a couple of things there. Do you have large neighbors or do you have small neighbors? Small neighbors basically means that you're going to have more touches around your property related to the dealing with neighbors. If you have larger neighbors, that is a less amount of neighbors around you. The other thing too is look at all the neighbors around you to see if they're, they have homes right next to your property line, or they have deer stands or deer feeders next to your property line, or trash dumps, and how they're treating their property. To be honest, the more trashy their property is, more than likely the more you're going to have to deal with them in some way or fashion down the road. If they have a good maintained property and the property lines are very managed, and the fencing is and so forth, they're taking care of their property, more than likely they're going to be a good land steward or good neighbor for you. This one is always very important that people miss. Walk the property, the whole property if possible. Now, if it's 100 acres, it's going to be hard to do all that, but cover as much property before you buy it, because you're going to you might find surprises such as trash dumps, or what I call deadheads of old oil wells in certain areas that haven't been disclosed. There's all sorts of stuff you can find on these properties that even the seller sometimes doesn't even know about, but they're supposed to disclose. And that might bring up more questions, or give you an idea of what you're gonna have to deal with when you buy that property. But that's very important that you walk the property. I see a lot of people that do not walk properties, and then they find stuff on when they buy it. If you're gonna use the property for hunting, make sure that you're allowed to hunt on the property, because the deed restrictions and the HOA restrictions, if it's a smaller acreage property, might not allow you to do it. I've seen deed restrictions on a property that's 50 acres, and they're saying that you can only bow hunt. So you make sure you do that. Also, the neighbors are very important related to what you have related to hunting, obviously. The other thing that people, at least in Texas, look for is that the property, all four corners or four sides, or whatever, how many sides that property is it high fenced, meaning game fenced, 8-foot fences, or is it regular 4-foot fence for cattle or livestock? That is a big thing for a lot of hunters or a lot of landowners related to how they want to deal with a neighbor that might have high fence around their property, and you're not going to be able to see wildlife come through, or it's just a ugly thing to look at. Another one that people overlook is property taxes, especially if you're using a property for recreational purposes or something that's not your primary residence. Ag exemption is across the United States, and it's termed ag evaluation or some other term, but that can reduce your overhead related to property taxes by 95 or 98%. It's huge. So when you go out to properties, make sure that ag is in place. And it doesn't mean you have to run cattle or livestock. You could lease it out. There's other ways to basically be crafty related to keep the ag exemption. And if a ag exemption isn't on the property, it actually devalues the property, in my opinion, because a lot of people don't want to buy it. They don't want to deal with paying full property taxes on something they're not going to live on or use all the time, especially if it's recreational. Now, if you're going to build on your property, you obviously you're going to have to pay for those improvements, but you still can keep ag on that property. Last but not least, make sure you look at financing prior to going out to see a property. Now, depending on the size of the property, if it's a smaller acreage property, you might be able to get away with 10% on your land loan, down, 10% down. But on larger properties, there's specialized mortgage companies out there that specialize in land, obviously, and they're going to do a 15 to 20%, and those terms could be 20 to 30 years. Typically, the interest rates are going to be higher than a residential home, and sometimes they have dividend plans where they can pay you out a certain amount per year back, even though those interest rates are high. And there's a lot of ways they can finance land and ranches. But typically just go out, figure out your budget, and then come back and say, okay, this is something that I can do. I went intentionally through these real quick. I didn't want to go deep down in these. If you think this is good content, comment below on which one you want me to go deeper into, and I will, because if I did that, I think we would be here for hours upon hours because it's so much content. But this list should give you a good start to having that conversation with your agent or whoever you're buying this property from, and look at these things because it's a big financial outlay or a decision to buy a property, and you want to buy something that's good so you can resell it or keep it in a family for a legacy.